Well, thank you all for being here. Um, Here is what we are all together today. Hopefully you're in the right place. We're going to be going through data analytics with Lisa and myself as well, and spending the majority of our time, hopefully in groups where you all can sort of talk through ideas together. So please, as you see here, share into the chat your name, pronouns, organization, where you're coming from, if you know your land acknowledgement, and I can paste this link into the chat as well in case you don't know and would like to learn more and find where you are. One of the reasons we begin our events and include land acknowledgements is to challenge the erasure of Indigenous and Native peoples' knowledge and practices that are undergoing continued settler colonialism. And we're as rooted and our community is committing to dismantle some of these systems of oppression. We want to make sure that we're elevating this in our group spaces and talking about and sharing the places and the lands in which we live and who the peoples are that those lands belong. So I live on the traditional lands of the Ohlone Chochenyo peoples here in the San Francisco East Bay. My name is Val. Do you want to move to the next slide? Lisa? Thanks. I'm Val. My pronouns are she and they. And I'm one of the co-founders of Rooted. As I said, I live in the San Francisco East Bay in the city of El Cerrito, in fact. And this land has a deep history and community of people who've lived here for thousands of years. For those of us who are not Indigenous to this land, I highly recommend looking into things like the Shumi land tax for those in the San Francisco Bay Area. Out on the East Coast, I know the Manhattan Fund is another one in the New York area, and just find the local groups and local tribes and Indigenous folks that are around you and how you might support their work and how they are envisioning our collective vibrant future. So I'll hand it to Lisa for a minute to introduce herself, and then we'll go through some housekeeping things and then get into our presentation.
Hi, my name is Lisa Fung. I'm the director here at UpMetrics, and I am residing in the land of the Ohlone people here in San Francisco. I was actually born and raised here in San Francisco, so I'm one of those rare San Franciscans and very happy to be and honored to be presenting today on data analytics. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so a little bit of Zoom etiquette. All of these are here because things have happened in various different events. So some of them might seem silly, but you'd be surprised. So please be aware of your camera angle, stay fully clothed, but of course no dry cleanings necessary. Comfy jammies are even okay too. Please use your name and organization just so that when we do get out into breakouts that people have some sort of context of who you are. Sometimes we've had people with sort of like strange nicknames and that's made some other people uncomfortable. So I just want to make sure we sort of, have that information. If you're needing or wanting privacy, that's okay, of course, too. Please do include your pronouns, and then please keep your mic off if you're, not in a speaking arena so that we can, not have background noise kind of disturbing everyone. So thank you for all as you're sharing your information into the chat. I appreciate it and look forward to getting to read through who's all with us today. So a little bit about Rooted. We are a communication strategy agency, as some of you know, but a lot of this work that we're doing in the community is really meant to help us think about ways we can use communications and technology as vehicles to advance equity. They're such strong levers, and they're often times used in ways that are inequitable or reproducing harm, and that we're really trying to hold spaces where we can learn and grow together. And sometimes that is learning in real time with one another. And that's not giving anyone a hall pass or anything along those lines, but really that we're trying to be thoughtful and aware as a community and see how we can use communication and technology to heal and empower each other and ourselves, rather than causing division. So the next piece here is just around the Design Justice Network. If you're not familiar with them, or don't think of yourself as a designer, now is the time. That's the work that you do. If you're here to think about data and analytics and how that can be used more successfully in your organization, you are a designer. And so looking into their work, as well as the liberatory design process, is another good one. And we can paste some of these things. Oh, thanks, Jess. Paste these things into the chat to take a look at. There's some really good and helpful information that that you can take a look at and understand and see how it can apply in your context. And we really think about these things, especially in the liberatory design process, being able to not only center the voices of those who are most impacted by the work that we're doing and thinking about the diverse lived experiences of our communities, but also helping ourselves to center and notice and reflect so that we can redesign ourselves as well to be more equity centered. So next we'll just go through our community agreements here. And I think what I'll ask is just have everyone read through them quietly on your own, and then I'll just elevate one or two after a minute or two. So if you can just sit and yeah, read through, please. So the two that I'd like to just add a little bit of voiceover to is number 4, be aware of power dynamics and consider the space you consume and share space. This is especially important when we're in our breakout rooms. We'll, ask you and provide some guidance around timing, but I know it's easy to get excited about an idea or get really in depth in thought in what you're wanting to talk about. And so just try and do your best to check yourself a little bit. And if you feel like you're maybe talking a little too long or commenting more often than other people, just, hold back a little bit and share the space. Um, the the other one I'd like to elevate is number 7. What's shared here stays here, and what's learned here leaves here. There will be things that we all talk about in breakouts and out in the greater space, about our organizations, about things that we've experienced or things that maybe are, not the greatest view of something. And so let's just, be aware of that. Try not to share one another's names or organizations, but just share what was learned and what was gleaned from the conversation. And of course, being willing to slow down and notice and name if anything is coming up in the room. And doing that again, learning together in real time is really important in all of this work. So going through our agenda here, doing our welcome and community agreements. So good, we're on time. Always proud of myself when we're on time. Then we'll go into a bit of UpMetrics presentation. So Lisa will start talking about that and taking you through some of the great work that they're all doing and tools that they have. And then we'll spend a little bit of time with some prompts and doing individual writing and reflections. So you have time to think about what you've heard and how that applies in your context. And then we'll break up into some round robin breakouts. There'll be about 5 people per group. And then we'll just ask you to each take 5 minutes, and we'll have instructions, and we have Word docs that if you've seen the resources folder, which I'll paste into the chat again in a minute, then you can take a look through, and once you're in a breakout, you'll then know which Word document is yours for you all to collectively write notes and share together. And then we'll just ask you to pick one person from your group to share back a couple learnings or a couple things that were of interest, back with the rest of us in the larger share out at the end. And then we'll have the last minutes of just closing and tools, any additional tools to share. And with that, I will hand it over to Lisa.
Hi, thank you, Val. Um, I am very excited to be able to speak with you today and talk to you about data. Yes, data is super fun. I work for an organization called UpMetrics. And as UpMetrics, we believe that if nonprofits have the tools to better visualize their analytics, they can make better informed decisions, build capacity, and better tell their story of impact. We're a company of about 35 employees, and we work with hundreds of nonprofit organizations, foundations, and impact investors across the nation and helping them with the platform and the tools so they can tell their story of impact. So as we think about data and we talk to a lot of our clients, what does data drive? Data is very central to many organizations because it drives storytelling. It drives impact measurement, program design, fundraising. How do you tell your story to your donors? How do you look at your donor data to identify which donors to approach next? It also defines resource allocation and, most importantly, learning. So organizations need to track this data so they can track progress towards their goals and they can better understand their impact. We also believe that a data-driven organization can also drive collaboration amongst peers and colleagues so they can make the best decisions moving forward if they're also looking at their data. So where to start? Lots of questions. And this can be very daunting, trying to become a more data-driven company. Like, what data do you collect? How much data do you collect? Where do you collect the data? Where's all this data? And how do I know what data to collect that's going to show my outcomes? These are all questions our clients ask us all the time. And or you may be an organization that has too much data. Like we're a 50-year-old organization and we have data all over the place. Which data do we pull in and which one do we keep? Which data do we continue collecting? Those are all might be some questions that you guys are thinking about as well. And then how do you know your data is good data, right? So we're working with clients that come to us with all these questions and we work with them on starting simple. Becoming on this data journey can be very complex, but we like to kind of break it down in 4 areas. And this data-driven area might be something that's been on your list for the past couple of weeks, months, maybe years. But if you break it down and simplify, you can begin to develop an impact framework in 4 simple steps by starting with defining, then collecting, analyzing, and leveraging. So defining phase is a part where you think about what questions you want to ask and what questions you want to ask that are going to inform how you're going to create more impact. Then you'll think about collecting your data. Where does that data reside? Does it reside on a CRM? Does it reside in a survey? Does it reside on pieces of paper filed in a cabinet somewhere? You want to be able to centralize all that data. And then you need to then start to analyze the data. How do you use that data to build custom graphs, dashboards, charts, and how do you track that data and progress over time? And then finally, taking that data, all that great information that you've learned, how do you leverage that? How do you make that data actionable? How do you make that to make better informed decisions? How do you use that to collaborate with your donors, with your board, with your other stakeholders? How do you share out that information? So today we're going to walk through this Decal methodology process. And at the end, I'll also provide you some tools that you can use to get started. So the first phase is define. This is like the hardest phase, and it's often the phase that's also overlooked. But if you start here in understanding what question you like to answer, this will start off on creating a more easier path in understanding what data to collect and how to analyze it. So sometimes this takes a little bit of time. It takes a lot of collaboration among your team members within your organization to really define what are your KPIs? What are things that you want to measure that show your impact? What questions do you want to answer? So some of these questions are listed here. Things that your organization should think about are what programs are creating the change we intended? For example, what are your outcomes and what are you achieving? Um, and are you achieving what you set out to do? Are you serving the communities that you set out to serve? Like, are you really reaching the needs of your community? Are you really reaching K through 12 kids, or maybe you're really reaching young adults? How does your data inform some of those decisions and how you serve your community? And then how are you doing against your goals that you've set out for yourselves? Have you established baselines and targets, and how are you tracking progress over time? And what do your stakeholders need to know? What informations do your donors need to know? What informations does donor A need to know versus donor B? Sometimes they need to know different data, right? And what does your board need to know? And what does your leadership need to know? All of those questions can be answered and really thought about in the define phase. And then most importantly, what does your organization want to learn? And how are you going to take those learnings and apply it to make impact and to make change? So then, after you go through understanding what questions you want to ask, you also want to define what are your basic KPIs. So everybody talks about KPIs. So what really is a KPI? KPI is called a key performance indicator. So let's start off with talking about a metric. A metric is a standard of measurement. So a metric can be number of community events held. It could be program attendance. It can be volunteer hours per semester. It could be number of individuals with proficiency literacy skills between the ages of 18 and 34. That's a very specific KPI metric. And then a KPI is simply one of your special metrics, right? So you may be tracking a lot of metrics, but your KPIs are going to be the metrics that you intentionally choose that you want to track progress over time. That's going to show an indication of your performance. So yes, you may collect a lot of metrics and a lot of data, but really focus in on what are your KPIs for your department and then rolling that up, what are your KPIs for your organization? So what makes a good KPI? A good KPI is measurable. It's easily able, it's a measurement that you can easily track. It should also be something that you can understand yourself, you can explain to others. It shouldn't be too complicated, and it should be a metric that you can empower people to make decisions that drive results. So it's a very important and very special, you'd say, metric. So that's all it is. It's nothing too big and too scary. And this is also very important in this decal process to really define those KPIs. Then we'll go into the next phase. This is the collect phase. You'll need a game plan to be able to collect the different metrics. So you'll need to sit down and think about where does your data reside. Your organization may have tons of data. And where is that data? Is it in surveys? Is your program data in CRMs? Is it in multiple CRMs? I mean, for example, we're working with an organization that's been in San Francisco for about over 50 years, and they literally have 15 different data systems for all their programming, fundraising, registration, and tracking. And what we're working with them is how do you gather all that data and put it into one place and make sense of it all? So thinking about publicly available data, a lot of organizations haven't thought about that. They think about their own data, but also there's tons of publicly available data. There's census data, there's economic data, there's financial data, there's housing data. What data is publicly available that also may help you with your organization and inform the important work that you're doing? And then thinking about collecting data in more of the qualitative sense. What testimonials do you have? Where there's some news articles talking about your organization? That's data as well. And how do you wrangle all that data together, the quantitative and the qualitative? So you'll want to start off with conducting a landscape analysis. And what we can provide at the end of this meeting also is to provide you a template so you can start thinking about where does your data reside, what system does it live in, who has access to that data, and who's the owner of that data, who's a champion to gathering that data. And then by identifying what data you have, you'll also be able to identify what gaps you may have in your data, right? So going back to the define phase, thinking about what questions you want to ask, and then identifying, do you have those data to support that answers your questions? And then if not, what are you going to do to help gather that data? You may have to send out surveys to your community. You may need to talk with your board or your donors to get that additional feedback. And then thinking about where publicly available data can also help fill in some of those gaps. And you'll also want to apply an equity lens to your data. And I'm going to turn it over to Val right now.
Turn my mic on first. Okay, you want to go to just head over to the next slide. We have a bunch of considerations in your data cycle around targeting, collecting, and analysis. It's really, data can illuminate so many different things based on the narrative that we build around the data that we're collecting. And as a result, as the interpreters, that's all of us, or the individuals analyzing the data, we actually sit in a very powerful position when building that narrative. And so it's important to sort of take these moments and think about how these decisions are being made, how the narratives that we are choosing to share are creating decisions potentially around program designs and resource allocations and so many other things. And in short, that like we need to be especially aware of the biases that we all hold and the different contexts in which we sit and live and the identities and lived experiences that we hold. We can never eliminate bias 100%, but if we're able to name it and acknowledge it, then we'll be able to minimize it as much as possible and then hopefully build more equitable solutions that are thoughtful and grounded in the communities that we're really seeking to serve. So on this slide, there's a number of different points in our data cycle where biases can impact equitable outcomes. Wait, go back. I'm not there yet. First, there's representation bias. So I'm just going to quickly sort of voice over each of these and then we'll dig into them into a little more depth. And representation bias can really impact our collection methods. A great question to ask is, as we're collecting this data, are we collecting it from everyone in the community? Are all of the appropriate voices being heard? Have we considered those who may have been historically not represented, have been historically marginalized? Really thinking, taking a moment to sit and reflect on what voices, what people, what lived experiences have been a part of our collection to date, and where are we missing things? The second is the interpretation bias. This can really present during the analysis phase. Are we misinterpreting ambiguous scenarios or information? As the individual or team that's interpreting the data, we have a huge responsibility to really think about, again, what biases we're bringing in as we're thinking about the feedback that we're getting and the insights that we're gathering. And last, exploring implicit bias, because this happens throughout the unconscious association, attitude, or belief that impacts the ways that we interpret based on our lived experiences, based on our identities, you know, all of those kinds of things. The kicker with implicit bias is that the more objective that we think we're being, the more implicit bias is probably impacting our interpretation. So it's really important to sit and ask ourselves and be skeptical of ourselves, consistently asking for additional feedback from other people in our community and our team, and making sure that we do have a diverse set of people with diverse lived experiences and identities that are interpreting the data. So let's dig into each one a little bit more. Representation, here's some things to consider. One is asking yourself and your team, are those most impacted by the outcomes of this process of whatever we're trying to design or create? Is this data representing them? More to the point, we strongly advise that you go beyond this and again, ask who are historically least represented or most marginalized voices in our community, and are they being heard in this process? And this is a principle rooted really adheres to, extremely strongly for all the reasons you can probably imagine, but especially in our user experience and brand design processes, it's really important to consider and make sure who we're designing with, and that we are designing with and not designing for. And, as particularly as a white woman in this space, making sure that my own identities and biases are not coming into play and being, more and more aware of those moments where they might be. And the last is taking time to think in depth about where and who you are collecting data from. Don't mistake an audience you currently engage with as maybe an audience that you're aspiring to engage with. Oftentimes when we're doing user research and experience design, we'll hear clients talking about aspirational audiences or communities that they don't currently talk to, but would like to reach. And then we'll hear like, our messaging isn't landing with these groups. And our normal response with all of this is, are you really reaching out to learn what they want to hear? Are you speaking from a place of understanding? Sometimes people will say this as like getting proximate to community members. There's lots of ways we can talk about this, but you can't talk at people. You really need to be a part of the community and speaking from a place of community and partnership. So on to interpretation bias in our analysis. During this phase, it's common to run into um, interpretation bias, right? It's tricky to identify because it's not always obvious what's showing up, but here's a couple ways to minimize. One is working as a team, as I mentioned, having multiple people reviewing data independently. This is what we do on our team oftentimes, is we'll gather the data, but then review it independently so we can come to our own conclusions and provide notes and feedback on those conclusions before we speak as a group. That way we don't influence one another. We try and do our best to build a diverse team who has lots of different lived experiences and perspectives so that they're bringing those experiences to the table as we're looking through our data. And then after analysis complete, going back to data sources and asking if our analysis is resonating with them. Is this what we heard? Are we interpreting what you said correctly? And then always assuming there's a different answer. Ask yourself what other ways I can explain what I'm seeing and prove myself wrong. It's like constantly like, how do I prove myself wrong and what might I not be considering? And then last, using triangulation. Are there other studies or independent data sets that may also support what you've learned? And there's so much out there. And granted, we all have limited bandwidth and amount of time and resources to do some of this, but sometimes going down a sort of Google, black hole every once in a while, or rabbit hole, is not so bad. You really can glean some good stuff. So the last is implicit bias. As I mentioned, this can be one of the most complex because it shows up in all different parts of your data cycle and in different forms. And the other and tricky thing is that it takes place unconsciously, right? These are unconscious attitudes and feelings based on our own past experiences. So the more objective you think you are, the more it can impact. So one of the things we say is, one, just slow down. Take time to understand and name things that are in your space, practicing mindfulness and taking time to notice and reflect on what might be coming up for you. Secondly, consider who you are and what identities and lived experiences you hold, and who you're working with and what their identities and lived experiences might be. And then finally, seeking additional perspectives, as I mentioned. You'll never get rid of this 100%, but the more we can minimize it, the better. And there's no magic bullet, of course, it takes time and practice. So just be kind to yourself throughout this whole process. Practice having an experimentation and learning and like iteration mindset. You're not going to get it right the first time. And that's why, I'm sort of coming back again to the idea of learning in real time, learning in public, and that's okay. And that as long as we speak to the moments where we make mistakes, then we can move on from them and do better the next time. So this last piece around reducing harm, here's a couple things to keep in mind. We need to recognize that behind the numbers and the data that we're collecting are real, true individual humans that may have traumatic experiences that you're asking them to talk about or share with you. And that we need to recognize that these things that we're seeking to understand from these individuals may be asking them to relive painful emotions. So first and foremost, center the interview on the perspective of the people that you're interviewing, not on your own. Think about how you can craft something that will really bring comfort and care for them and not just feeling extractive, because these kinds data analysis and data collection can feel extractive. So how can you do that more gently and kindly? And if done well, this really can build trust and deepen relationships. So sort of keeping your eyes towards that. Next, needing to understand, that the cognitive and emotional load that you might be putting on folks when you're asking for input. And just, I want to elevate that now in particular, BIPOC community members may feel oversubscribed for these kinds of conversations and surveys. And, whatever they are able or interested in sharing is truly a gift. And so, please take it that way and hold that mindset around it. If you do ask questions that conjure emotions, be prepared to do something about it. Otherwise, don't ask the question. um, it's one of those things that, ask yourself, based on what I'm asking, is our organization ready and willing and able to do something about this? Otherwise, don't ask the question. Maybe save it for another time when you're more prepared to do something. And then the last is hold an active listening mindset. Be prepared to hear uncomfortable things and respond kindly and calmly, and consider if your bliss is coming at someone else's expense. And once we get into breakouts, you'll see some additional resources around this listed on your Google Doc, but I'm also going to paste them into the chat in just a moment. Some different articles about interviewing, ways to tell stories ethically, a great Trabian Shorter's video about asset-based storytelling. Sorry, my tongue is getting tied. And things along those lines. So you'll see a bunch of resources about sort of what to do with your data once you have it. So now I'll hand it back to Lisa.
Thank you, Val. So, not only is, applying this equity lens to your data super important, but also starting small. What you'll want to do is when you're starting this journey is start with maybe just a department. Focus on the most critical questions and things you need to know today. Like Val said, only gather the data that you think you can take action on and do something with. And then select your key performance metrics, which are the most important metrics that you want to track. And then, capture stories. Think about your qualitative data as well. That completes the story. So with the next phase, this is the third phase, is the analyze phase. This is the fun part. One thing that can be very tough in this phase is that people want to is really trying to be honest with that data. Some of the data can be validating. It could be validating for all the amazing work you're doing and just quantify who you're serving and how you're serving it. But it also have an open mind. It may not represent exactly what you've expected. May not paint a beautiful picture, but this is important to your success. Negative outcomes can be seen to be informative, and getting a strong sense of also what's not working can help you make better decisions to move forward and create more impact. So don't ignore the results, even if it's not quite what you expected. So there's different types of data analytics. There's, 4 major types: descriptive, diagnostic, prescriptive, and predictive. The descriptive is what's happened. Take a look at your historical data, what happened. It answers those questions. The diagnostic type of analytics describes why did it happen. Prescriptive analytics is what will happen, and predictive analytics answers the question, what shall we do? But for the purpose of this session, we're going to really focus on the descriptive analytics, because this is the foundation to your data insights. It drives metrics, it drives hypothesis and actions, so you can move your data forward. There's a lot of tools that you can use to take a look at your descriptive data. Some of the most common tools in the market out there are like Google Sheets or charts, Excel, Power BI, Tableau, and UpMetrics. So what I'm going to do now is show you some of the data that can be done in terms of I'm going to show you some raw data that can be analyzed and show you the power of visualizing and diving a little bit deeper into some of your data. So I'm going to share with you a sample data set. Can you see that right now in an Excel sheet? Val, thumbs up? Okay, great. So this is an example data set. Your data may not look as clean as this. We understand no organization has perfectly clean data. This is our demo data. There may be holes. There may be words that you need to clean up to really start to visualize your data. But part of understanding and analyzing your data is really first taking a look at how clean your data can be before you start to analyze it. So notice that this is just in pure rows and columns, and most of the fields are filled out, which is great. And then you can use a tool like UpMetrics or Google Sheets and pull it into a platform that looks something like this. Okay. So this is what we've done in our UpMetrics tool is we take the data, then its raw format in the data tab, and we can create dashboards easily to identify what data is underlining in the spreadsheet. So it's much easier to see how many participants you have, total eligible hours, total attendee hours. You can also start to visualize the people that you serve on a map, and other data that you might have in your data set that you can use in terms of graphs, bars, and charts to really dive into this a little bit deeper and make informed decisions. For example, I'm going to start creating a widget here. Let's say you might want to do a cluster chart. You can click on this tab here. These are areas where you can just really easily pull in the data. And using tools like this or Tableau or Power BI or Google Sheets, you can really dive into your data a little bit easier and then start to make decisions. This is just an example of an organizational snapshot. You can also think about using your donor data to drive insights. This is data from a donor database, and it is pulled into a visualization so you can see number of total donations by month, amount of donations by month, amount of donations by new donors. And you can visually see and start to think about, okay, where are the donations coming in from? Are they coming in from new donors, from repeat donors? And then you can really design a strategy about doing your outreach to your donors. The other area that people think about in data is community indexing. So this is data pulled in directly from the census data. And we can also pull in data based upon where the area that you're serving, and really take a look at things like unemployment rate or poverty or percentage of students enrolled in K-12. And this also can form a strategy on who you're serving and how you're serving your community. It's taking a little longer to download. But anyways, these are just examples of how to start to analyze and visualize your data. It's an organizational snapshot. Donor data here, community indexing. And again, by diving into and visualizing your data, you can make better informed decisions. Community indexing, there's a lot of publicly available data out there. Policy Map is a great source to get community data. NCES is publicly available federal data regarding school data. And then the census data is also available out there as well. And the last stage of the Decal methodology is the leveraging stage. And this is the stage where you'll learn from your data to make decisions. And this is really what it's all about: learning from your data, collaborating with your teammates, and then driving internal discussions that will drive impact. And some questions that you may want to ask yourself and your team is, have you made progress towards your goals? You know, do you understand your impact that you're doing, that you're making in the communities? Do you have the data to drive decision making? Maybe you've identified in this process there's holes and gaps, and you have to reiterate. And will your data drive action? Will you be able to make change from understanding this data? And does your data improve collaboration? And are you capturing and sharing your data and leveraging your data? So communicating your impact and leveraging your storytelling is really, really valuable. Donors and stakeholders want to hear what organizations are doing. COVID is a perfect example of how all of us have had to change who we serve, how we serve, what we serve. And so that's a great example of really adding the storytelling aspects to not to the quantifiable data as well. And so you have the data, and then thinking about how you're going to share it. Who do you want to share it with? What are the results of this event that's happened, and how are you going to communicate your outputs? Sometimes just communicating your outputs is fine. You know, I think it's really hard for organizations to say, how do I communicate my outputs, and how does that drive my outcomes? Sometimes it's just okay to communicate what your outputs are. And also communicating that you're learning from your data, that you're reiterating from your data. I think that's really important. That's what funders want to hear. And they also want to hear that merge of that qualitative and quantitative storytelling that completes the story. The qualitative really helps round out your story, and it really describes some very complex issues. So share this information across your organization, and really, you know, help your organization become more data driven. And so your story that should also think about, it should inspire action. Action is either action from your funders or your volunteers or your staff. And use the data to strengthen collaboration with everyone, your stakeholders, your funders. Communicate the results with your community, what you learned from this. You know, you may want to double down on learning within your organization and use this for forward thinking. You know, use this for strategic planning and thinking ahead. And, you know, apply a data equity lens to your data. That's super important. And lead with data. Share and tell your impact, and share your story. So this is a link if you would like to start on the Decal the Decal methodology. We will put this link in the chat. Feel free to download this, copy this, and use this as a tool for your own organization. Thank you. Val, you're on mute.
I kept hitting it and it wouldn't go. Okay, so you probably saw just really quickly there that the look away from your screen for 20 seconds came up. So let's just take an eye rest, do a stretch as you're able or interested or need. We're going to be moving into our more interactive part in just a minute. So let me get my, so if you have a window available to you, we welcome you to look out and share it with share some light. And as always, take care of whatever your body needs during this time. Okay, and hopefully everyone can see my screen again. And here we go. Oh, I just realized, Lisa, you were going to do the poll, but it ended up right here. Okay, why don't we do the poll at the end? That way we can, that way you can share your screen again.
All right.
Sounds like our timing got off there. Oops. Okay. So we're going to move straight into our individual activity and spend about 5 minutes here. And I'll put on a little bit of background music as well to think through some of these questions for yourself. What are some of the areas where your organization does a good job using data or collecting data? Where could you do a better job? And here are some areas to consider for yourself. And then thinking about what equity challenges you have within your organization's life cycle, from defining what you're going to collect to collecting to analysis, or what barriers you have to collecting data at all, because that's really, that can be such a big piece of this also. And so just spend a little time thinking about that for yourself, and those will be the prompts moving into our breakout groups together, so that hopefully you can help one another overcome some of the barriers you may experience or get some good ideas of things you could be doing in your organization. And I will also paste the questions into the chat. Okay, hopefully that was enough time to be able to do some thinking on your own. And now it's time to do some thinking together. So before we move into our groups, I'm just going to go through a couple quick guidelines and quickly show you the tool that you are invited to use. You certainly don't have to, but how we've set it up. We're invite you to try out. It's 10 minutes for introductions and rereading instructions and just making sure everyone sort of knows what you're doing. And then, like I said, there'll be about 5 people in each of your groups. Some groups have 4. And then spend about 30 minutes in round robin discussion, 5 minutes per person, sort of sharing what notes you took and the things that are, true in your context and your organization. And then have a little time, about 10 minutes at the end, so that you can comment on one another, elevate things that are feeling especially relevant to everyone, and then pick, 1 to 3 things to share back to the larger group. If you have the link to the resource folder, hopefully everybody does, but the links to each of these Word documents are in there, and I'm just going to quickly show you what one of them looks like, just so you can see sort of all of the components. All of this will be self-facilitated. Come on, load please. I should have just dragged it from my other window. But in any case, you have some links here at the top for the roundtable if you want to join our Slack community, the worksheet that we just shared in the chat, and then the general resource folder. Each team will have a number and then whatever the name of your room is. Here's the information of sort of what to do, and then choosing 1 or 2 ideas, stories, tools, solutions to share back. And please do pick a spokesperson for your group. And then beneath that are just a bunch of different resources, those equity in your data cycle resources that I pasted in the chat, as well as a bunch of other resources that may be useful to you. So those are continuing down the page as well. And then the last thing to cover here is just privacy. If there's anything you don't want shared, the Google Docs will not be editable after the roundtable. And so please just send me a note if there's anything you don't want me to share or consider. We try and use information that you all come up with to share back with the community through toolkits or blog posts or various things like that. So please do elevate to me if there's something you want to make sure I don't include. We always leave out names, of course. It would just say participant or something, but I just want to make sure people know that we do try to share our learnings back with the larger community. So okay, everyone should be back now. Welcome back, everyone. We'll spend a few minutes here just sharing back anything that you all feel like was fruitful, interesting, so on and so forth. So does any group want to start? Please do about 2 minutes per group if possible. And yeah, anyone want to start? Otherwise, I'll just sort of work through the list. Oh, thanks, Sam.
Yeah, so my group was the Porcupine group, and we had a pretty good range of just different organizations, all kind of within the nonprofit space. Mine is actually for profit, specifically for candidates, but I was the outlier. I think overall, we all, as organizations, did a really good job of collecting data, but a lot of it was how you then activate on that data. So the 2 kind of core issues that we talked about solving for was, 1, how you can expand audiences. So for one of the organizations, it was about expanding the donor base. Like right now, it's skewing a little bit older, and those donors are kind of aging out of the nonprofit. And so how can you figure out a way to understand the needs of a younger, different demographic than your current audience? And so one of the things that we talked about was paid advertising, like on Facebook, because really it's very hard to take your existing list if you're trying to go after someone that's completely different. So we talked about, doing a quick short survey for a small amount of money, like $100 to $200 on Facebook, and promoting the survey towards a specific demographic that you're trying to hit. And that would just give you the ability to better understand an audience that you're trying to go after, but you haven't actually been able to talk to yet. And that was really just, unfortunately, in our capitalistic society, you kind of have to pay for those types of things. But with Facebook, it is fairly cost effective. And then the other piece that we talked about was getting people on the same page. So one of the issues in 2 of the organizations was trying to find a way for the people that are collecting the data to understand the importance of that data collection. And that really comes to 2 things. One is getting everyone on the same page and establishing whatever your goals are early on, and making sure that everyone is agreeing to those. And then the other piece was just finding ways to incentivize those people who are actually collecting the data, whether it's showing them how you're using the data and how that can help their jobs, or even doing, small incentives like $5 gift card if you can, make sure that people fill out a survey during an event, for example. So those were kind of the 2 main issues that we talked about.
Thank you. Anyone want to go next?
Sure. I'll go. So my name is Sanhita. I go by she and her. I was in the Penguins group, and in our group, we actually had two people from the same organization and some wonderful people from other organizations as well. And to answer the first question, in which areas our organizations do a good job in using data, for the sphere, I think one of the organizations is a little bit new to data collection, and we've currently been building a dashboard with our social media data and our website data. And I think we just need a little bit more time in aggregating more data. But I think in terms of putting these things in place, we've done a pretty good job. And Diana also mentioned that USC does a great job of preparing surveys and questions to collect data as well. And that's one of their outreaches in collecting data. And when it came to the second question of where our organizations can do a better job in using data, one of our unanimous answers was impact measurement. I think we all have so many goals, and sometimes it's hard to understand whether we are reaching our full potential, especially if there's maybe certain groups that align with our audience profile that we're not reaching yet. And to really understand what kind of emotional and impact we're creating in people with our work is sometimes not as easy to understand. And I think surveys definitely do a great job of that, but there's so much more ethnographic data out there that we have the potential of collecting, and that's one of those missing pieces. And then this also, I think, is in line with resource allocation, is also one of the challenges. I think this is kind of solved through data aggregation. I think the more data that we have, the more we know what channels are working, and that's where we can, put in more resources and money. The equity challenges that were mentioned was technology barriers to data collection and the learning curve when bringing on new people. And some of the equity data is hard to come by when working in Central Appalachia. Although the communities are by no means monoliths, diversity numbers are lower and it's difficult to have representative samples. These were some of the equity challenges. And when we were talking about some of the tools and ideas that would help in overcoming the challenges and the areas our organizations can do a better job at using data. I think it's understanding the right platforms to make a part of your organization, whether that's a CRM, which is a customer relationship management platform. And there's options like Salesforce, Salsa, HubSpot, and many more. I think these platforms really help us in staying organized with the donors that we have, the members that we're reaching, and the kind of content that is appropriate for different groups. It helps us in targeting as well. And data aggregating studio, data dashboard studio, Google Data Studio, Tableau, and Google Sheets are also great tools for collecting data and showing it in a very visual format that makes it easier for everyone to understand. And another thing is just with social media data as well, like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and all these platforms have amazing analytics in their channels as well. And I think being able to look at these metrics month over month and understand, what's working and what are our, what do you call it, the areas that we're reaching and trying to just optimize on those by looking at our data month over month. It's also one of the tools.
Great.
That's all I have.
Great. Thanks so much. I think Jess, you had your hand raised. You want to go next?
Sure. Thank you. So we were Team Dolphin, and there were a lot of shared themes that came up as we were talking, and we actually, I think, spent a lot of time kind of in the, it was very therapeutic, I think, for our group, because we kind of talked a lot about that, like up and down of just feeling like at some points we feel like we have complete control over this and we know exactly what the problems are and what we need to do. And then at other times it's like, oh my God, where do we even start? And so it was sort of helpful to just have that ability to connect with each other, I think. And a lot of the themes that came up for us were really around things like who is measuring the dynamics, who's measuring the data and the dynamics that that creates in terms of representation and accuracy. So for a number of us, we're working in sort of very white dominant cultures and organizations. And that has implications, especially if the folks that we're working with are from groups that have more representation from historically underrepresented and marginalized identities. And so that just the veracity of the data and the dynamics and sort of what gaps that causes. And that kind of led us into some conversation around just what is the meaningful stuff, like what do we need to be measuring? And there was a lot of, I think, pressure felt in the room from both internal and external sources, like funders and stuff, in terms of measuring like vanity metrics or things that serve their politics and agenda or reinforce the status quo versus sort of finding ways to measure more meaningful ways of describing impact and outcomes. And this was particularly true. I think there were a couple of our group members are working in the education space. And so really understanding like, what does learning mean? What does well-being mean? And how do you measure that in settings and systems that really actually actively work against measuring some of those things? And then org dynamics came up as well, like, and I heard this in the other folks who have just shared out, like, how do you act on that input? And both internally, it kind of requires data measurement, and impact measurement requires a certain degree of buy-in, right? And this sort of acknowledgement that this actually matters, then this work matters, and especially when you talk about the equity lens, like there needs to be a commitment to that and buy-in for that. And so a lot of the data-centric work we're doing feels like it's to build the case for data centricity or data measurement and meaningful measures, which feels a little bit like circular. And so we didn't do a lot of like talking about practical tactical solutions. I think a lot of our group conversation was really just sort of, I don't want to use the word commiserating because that's too negative, but it was really, I think, just feeling validated and validating each other, that this is actually really challenging, and that depending on the organization and the structure and the culture and the people involved, it's going to look very different how that gets resolved. And there was a lot of other really amazing conversation in that group, and I probably didn't capture it all, but if anybody else wants to add. Ashley, looks like you're next.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Ashley. And I'm going to I realize we're getting close to time, so I'm just going to pause so that those that can stay on and want to hear a little bit more can, and those that need to hop off can also do that. So I'm just going to put a couple informational things into the chat really quickly, and then we'll circle back because I really want to hear what other people have to say if you're able to stay, because I realize we're running over a little bit. So please do take the survey. It really helps us to be able to know what topics to start planning for 2022, how to reformat or reframe things as needed. You'll see in the slide deck, sorry, I'm going to just sort of run through these things real quick. UpMetrics has some additional toolkits, and Lisa has so graciously offered to do consultations for anyone that wants a custom dashboard set up or just a consultation around your data and analytics. So please take a look at that, and her email is there, and we'll send out all this stuff afterwards as well. Again, please, please, please take the survey. This is all about data and analytics, right? So we need that input from you all as well, so we know what to change and how to change it. And then the last things here are, we have a brand and communication strategy coaching cohort coming up starting in a couple weeks. Coming to the roundtable gives you, 50% off if you want to use Roundtable 2021 for your individual or group spot. We also have a nonprofit technology summit coming up in the end of October. It will be right around Halloween. And so costumes are optional and really Hope people will dress up because I will definitely dress up, and maybe I can get Lisa too also. And then the last piece here, in partnership with TechSoup and UpMetrics, we've been working on this data analytics course. So links to the courses are there as well. And that's some of the do-it-yourself and ongoing kind of work you can do. So our last thing here was a closing activity to commit to do one thing with your data in the next month. And then again, those who want to stay on and continue discussion for a few minutes to share out ideas, please do. And I'll head back to that slide. And those who need to head out, please do so and have a lovely rest of your day. And thank you all so much for coming. And Lisa, any last words as I head back to the...
Yeah, just thank you for your time. Thank you for taking the time. You're doing such amazing work in your organizations. And yeah, can be very complex. And if anyone wants to book a time with me, I put into the chat my calendar. Just pick a time or email me. Happy to look at your data, create a custom dashboard for you, just so you can see what that looks like in the UpMetrics platform. So thank you again for coming.
So anyone who can stick around, Ashley has her hand up, I think, to go next. So please go ahead, Ashley.
Okay, hey all. So I was in the Panda group, and reorient here a little bit. We all work in nonprofits. Had a consultant in our group, but currently working with nonprofits, works with nonprofits. And so a lot of the kind of higher themes came out of the particularities that come from working in that sector, I feel like. So one of our main questions was about lost data and whether or not we can or how we can capture lost data, particularly thinking about organizations that may have been, functioning for some years but have not prioritized data, but still want to, measure their impact throughout the years, have the history of the organization represented in that data. So that felt like a challenge that, that we had some conversation around. The next thing was the comparison between qualitative and quantitative data, particularly, again, thinking about nonprofits versus for-profit sector, and the way in which, for-profit sectors and other different sectors, there's really an emphasis on quantitative data, and the numbers are really, important, and everyone understands them, and that's how you measure your impact in, dollars and cents. And when you bring it over to the nonprofit sector, it becomes a lot more qualitative. We're more invested in storytelling and the people and the impact and things that aren't necessarily measured in numbers. But how do we find that balance, right? Like, how do we make sure that the qualitative is supported by the quantitative when that hasn't been an area of focus? Related to that is just the lack of kind of capacity within nonprofits. Many of us don't have a data department. We don't even have a department where data really fits neatly, so that seems like a common challenge and something that carries throughout the entire process, from implementation or from collection through analysis. And that was also our final point, was that the entire process and the implementation in an organization that might have a lesser capacity or might not have this emphasis feels challenging, but particularly the starting and the end point, the connection or the collection and the analysis. Those two kind of end caps feel really particularly challenging to make sure that they're carried throughout. So yeah, I'll stop there. That was the Panda group. And if I missed anything, feel free to jump in the chat.
Thank you. And I think, who did we miss? We haven't done kangaroo. Did we have silkworm?
Yeah, I can do silkworm.
Okay, great.
Kangaroo. So my name's Kadita Stone, and I'm with the organization called Alabama Forward out of Alabama. And we had, so the the first question about what the organizations are good at was we all collectively agreed on that we're good at collection. And what we could be better at is meeting people. No, we're also good at meeting people where they are and figuring out what that looks like. Where we could be better at was fostering a culture of curiosity with amongst others, because usually decision makers and like lawmakers and things like that don't want to change because they are kind of set in their ways. And the equity challenges were leveraging and manipulation. So as data collectors, sometimes we can, not sometimes, most of the time we can create our own story and create what we want to be put out there instead of what's true sometimes. So that's a manipulation tactic that is also an equity challenge. So yeah, I believe that was all for that one. If somebody else that was in the Silkworm group wants to add, they feel free if I left something out.
Makiko, are you talking? Because your mic's off.
Sorry, sometimes it is hard to figure out the outreach to underrepresented groups in an organization and actually how to, reach communities of people that maybe haven't been part of something.
Yeah, whenever I think about that particular issue, I think about partnerships and like what partnerships, who can you connect to, who are organizations that, may be doing a better job of this or that are more within communities and are more frontline with whatever the things are that you're doing. And reaching out and just trying to become organizational friends. Like you can easily say, we call it strategic partnerships, of course, but I try and just think about it as like, because sometimes that feels a little more stressful than like just trying to make friends with other humans and other people and understand where they're coming from. And so that's how how I start to frame it when I'm not feeling like I understand something, is like, who can I go and make friends with and understand better and learn from. I think our last group was Kangaroo or Makiko. Were you in Kangaroo? No. Okay.
And I was in Silkworm.
Okay, Silkworm. Thank you. I'm trying to pop through them. Anyone from Kangaroo? Maybe they all had to leave. They had really thorough notes though, so. Yeah, it looks like they all had to leave. Okay. Well, I'll put the link to their notes in here so that people can read them. For those who didn't capture notes in the Word docs, that's totally fine. All of these are just meant to be resources and helpful for everyone. But Kangaroo did have thorough notes, so then everyone can read through and see some of the things that they talked about. So that brings us to the end. Thank you all for participating and being so present and thoughtful. And it's always just such a joy when we can have fruitful conversations together. And yeah, if you ever have questions or want to reach out, I'm here and happy to talk and follow up. And for some of you who are still on the call know, you're always welcome to email me. And, if you need a 15-30 minute chat to think through something and just need a thought partner, I'm always happy to do that. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you all. Any final questions or thoughts or anything?
Thank you. This is really great. I really appreciate it.
Good. I'm so
very deep and rich. So.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yay. Okay. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all, and we'll be in touch. Bye.